Watatsumi Island. It's so calm, so peaceful. It's home to the former residents of Enkonomiya, followers of a benevolent protector deity that built their beautiful island paradise out of the dead remains of their former god. Wait, what? What?
16 paranoia-filled days later.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that it's impossible that Watatsumi Island is built on the dead body of a god because, hey, Orobashi's remains are on Yashiori Island. And you would be correct on the latter note, but not on the first, at least not if my theory is correct. But in order to explain this runaway train of thought of mine, we'll have to go on a little history lesson and take a look at some inspiration for Orobashi, Kokomi, and Watatsumi Island. So buckle up and brace yourself for another Genshin Impact Theory video! Yes, I said theory video. That means the contents of this video are riddled with speculation based off as much factual and relevant information as I can find, both in and out of the game itself. Please do not take any of the following claims as fact. You are responsible for doing your own research and drawing your own conclusions. This has been my disclaimer. Onwards to Theory Town! Island. Anyway, let's start with the abbreviated history of Watatsumi Island and the infamous Orobashi. Thousands of years ago, Orobashi fled Tevat in favor of the Dark Sea, where it discovered a group of people living at the bottom of the ocean. These people were being terrorized by a being known as the Dragon Heir of the Depths. Orobashi defeated this being, thus freeing the people at the bottom of the Dark Sea and guiding them back to the surface where he created the island of Watatsumi out of the coral that it tore from its body. The people of Watatsumi Island then worshipped Orobashi as their protector deity thereafter, until one day, Orobashi challenged the Raiden shogun and was cleaved in two by the Muso no Hitotachi. Now, if you've only read the book Sangonomiya Chronicles, then this history seems pretty cut and dry. But this book was written by a fairly unreliable author from the Kujo clan, and therefore likely doesn't paint the whole picture, well, accurately. So let's treat this account not as a complete history of Watatsumi Island, but as the launch point for our investigation. Now, there are 4 key pieces in this historical account: Orobashi, the Dragon Heir of the Depths, the people at the bottom of the sea, and the coral from which Watatsumi was fashioned. I'd like to look at each piece in turn. So let's start with Orobashi. Orobashi is likely named after the Ars Goetia demon, Orobas, a demon that was typically depicted as having the features of a horse. So why is Orobashi a giant white snake in Genshin then? Well, honestly, it probably just has more to do with the fact that Orobashi has a name that has similarities with the Japanese mythical snake Orochi, or Yamata no Orochi. So, Orochi, Oroshi, Orobashi, you get the idea. We'll talk a little bit more about Orochi in a minute. Orobas, the demon, is said to be friendly, reliable, gentle, honorable, and most of all, trustworthy, as lying is the one thing he'll never do. Orobashi, therefore, should have maintained at least some of these traits, and I think that's actually reflected through his portrayal as a white snake. In Japan, white snakes are seen as signs of protection and good fortune, notably being associated with an exceptionally popular goddess known by the name of Benzaiten, or Benten. Not that Benten, this Benten. Anywho, Benzaiten is a goddess of luck, fertility, and water. She's depicted as a beautiful woman, a beautiful white snake, or the head of a beautiful woman on the body of a beautiful white snake. In one myth, she even descends to the earth in order to subdue a dragon that's terrorizing the people, which sounds a lot like how Orobashi descended to the depths of the Dark Sea to subdue the Dragon Heir. Now, this loving and merciful persona of Orobashi is completely at odds with the other suggested source of inspiration for Orobashi, namely Yamata no Orochi. See, Orochi was an 8-headed serpent from the land of Izumo. Every year, the serpent demanded a sacrifice of one of 8 daughters of an elderly couple that lived within its domain, until there was only one daughter left alive. At this point, another god, Susanoo, came upon this family and decided to slay the serpent by lulling it to sleep with a special sake in exchange for their final daughter's hand in marriage. Now, apart from the name similarities I touched on earlier, and the fact that they're both serpent-snake deities, there's not much else to tie these two together. Except that Orobashi was killed on Yashiori Island. It's entirely possible that Yashiori Island is named after the very specific type of pure wine used to lull Orochi to sleep. You could also say that the Electro Archon in this case is playing the role of Susanoo, as, the one who slayed the serpent, although there was no marriage involved. Probably. Anyway, Orobas the demon was also said to take another form during times of battle. That form was extremely destructive, and I think that destructive form might be reflected in Orobashi's uncharacteristic aggression on Yashiori Island, as, he's acting more like Orochi versus his normal benevolent ruling form of Benzaiten. If you're interested in learning more about Yashiori Island, the death of Orobashi, and the Tatarigami that he left behind, I highly recommend that you check out this excellent video by Clementine, as he does a really great job going into detail about exactly what happened over there. Definitely worth a look, so go check that out. Oh wait, really? And welcome back. Now, I mentioned that upon his death, Orobashi left behind something called the Tatarigami, a horrible curse born from the lingering anger of Orobashi himself. This so-called curse causes extreme pain, mental anguish, and drives others into madness. The Tatarigami is likely the same phenomenon that Xiao and the other yakshas were tasked with containing within Liyue. That phenomenon was described as being the lingering hatred and grudges of fallen gods, which is what Orobashi is. You may recall that every yaksha except for Xiao went mad from exposure to this phenomenon, leading to the confirmed deaths of at least 3 of the 5 yakshas. And one that was driven insane, and no one knows where he is. The Tatarigami also seems to be linked with the crystal marrow growing on Orobashi's bones, as well as the production of delusions in Inazuma which sap the life force of those who are foolish enough to use him. And this appears to have some links to the concept of erosion that keeps cropping up within the main plot. Ajdaha, for example, was sealed by Zhongli because his senses began to deteriorate until he became a danger to himself and everyone around him. Zhongli called this process erosion, and it's something even he worries about succumbing to one day. Now, the lingering hatred Zhao fights to contain, the Tatarigami, and Ajdaha's erosion all have the same visual indicator, a dense black smoke that rises off the body. And when the traveler infiltrates the delusion factory, it's filled with a dark smoke. Now, that smoke is violet, not black, but it's definitely linked to Orobashi's crystal marrow and still responds to the traveler's anger, knocking them unconscious. Scaramouche makes a great point about emphasizing the fact that the traveler has to succumb to his anger, and that anger seems to be what links these 3 phenomena together. Now, when you really think about it, Zhao is ridiculously tough. The traveler spent 10 minutes in the delusion factory before passing out? Zhao has been steeping in this stuff for 1,000 years and still has his sense of self. Boy's just built different, I guess. So let's assume for the moment that the Tatarigami is just another form of erosion. Is it not then possible that Orobashi, like Zhongli, was growing increasingly more aware of its state of degradation? What if Orobashi had witnessed this same phenomenon manifesting within the dragon heir that it fought within the Dark Sea? I think that the dragon heir of the depths was the original deity worshipped by the people that now inhabit Watatsumi Island. Its rampaging was likely caused by erosion, turning it against the people who once worshipped it. Then Orobashi, being a merciful deity with no people to call his own, could have killed the dragon heir as an act of mercy, both to save the people who lived in the Dark Sea and to free the dragon heir from its suffering. He then leads them back to Teyvat and builds them a beautiful home where it's safe, only to later realize that history repeats itself as Orobashi begins to show symptoms of erosion. Zhongli decided to retire and forfeit his gnosis as an attempt to protect the people of Liyue once erosion finally takes him. A gave up her body and meditates on the spiritual plane in order to escape erosion. Ajdaha was sealed beneath a great tree to prevent his rampaging due to erosion. So what if Orobashi provoked the Electro Archon on purpose? It could have been his attempt at protecting his people. If he knew he would lose control of his senses and leave a dangerous lingering curse behind like so many before him, he could have provoked her on Yashiori Island in order to prevent the curse from affecting his beloved Watatsumi Island. Not to change the subject, but also I'm changing the subject, let's talk about this coral that Watatsumi Island is supposed to be constructed of. Now, most accounts and in-game myths seem to suggest that the coral was a part of Orobashi's body, but I disagree with this. Due to the lack of growths and markings on the images we've seen of Orobashi, I don't believe that the coral from which Watatsumi was fashioned originally belonged to or grew from Orobashi himself. In fact, the jeweled branch of coral weapon ascension item even says as much. It says that the coral cannot be found anywhere in Teyvat, but it was a gift that the Great Serpent obtained when it broke into the Dark Sea. For to be filled with coral was to be mighty, and its power would be shaved away as those corals were lost. In other words, those corals contain power far beyond the norm. Again, this coral was a gift that Orobashi obtained when he went to the Dark Sea. He embedded the branches of coral on his body either intentionally or unintentionally and used their power. Then he later shed those branches in order to form the island of Watatsumi. That means that Watatsumi is made out of coral from the Dark Sea, not necessarily coral from the body of a god. I know I said that the island is actually made from the dead remains of a god, and we will get to that, I promise, but I had to establish this bit first. The coral was placed on top of a dead god. But obviously it wasn't Orobashi, right? Because, well, he's on Yashiori, so what god are we left with? That's right, the Dragonair. The one I am proposing was the original deity of the people of Watatsumi Island. They are quite literally living on the body of their god. Don't believe me? Well, I didn't believe me either. Until I did the world quest, The Moon Bathed Deep. Now, if you haven't done it yet, spoiler warning for the entire quest. Because honestly, the whole quest is pretty straightforward and the whole thing matters. Okay, so the depths that the Dragonair came from is called Enkonomiya, whereas the shrine on Watatsumi Island is known as Sangonomiya. The entrance to Enkonomiya is just below the Sangonomiya shrine in that perfectly round pool of water in the center of the island. Okay? With me so far? Now, the Moon Bathed Deep quest begins with a shrine maiden tasking us with carrying out the first part of a ritual performed on the island that prevents the island from deteriorating. And this is kind of an ongoing issue with Watatsumi Island, which we notice in the war efforts, because Kokomi makes a point of telling us that they're always low on supplies because growing food on Watatsumi Island is actually quite difficult. This quest explains why. During the 2.1 Moon Chase Festival event, Madame Peng tells us that gods actually can't be completely killed, which would really explain a lot about why we see so many sealed gods, or lingering pieces of gods and whatnot. So from how I understand it, based on this new piece of information, the dragon Heir effectively was separated, his soul from his body. Okay? The body became the island of Watatsumi, whereas the soul remained down in the Dark Sea. You can think of the body as now being Sangonomiya and the soul as being Enkonomiya, or at least that's where they are. So as the story goes in the quest The Moon Bathed Deep, the Dragon Heir's spirit in Enkonomiya calls to its body in Sangonomiya. And as it does this, nutrients are leached from the soil and food becomes difficult to grow. In other words, parts of the body start going back to the soul. The ritual performed in this quest is supposed to put a temporary stop to this process by effectively resealing the entrance to Enkonomiya so the soul can no longer reach the body. This is partly why I say the island of Watatsumi was built on the remains of a former god. For those of you who are still not convinced and think that the island still is formed from coral that grew on Orobashi's body, Well, let's look at the rest of the quest, because something struck me as really odd when I was going through it. See, the ritual involves visiting 5 shrines: the Shrine of the Eye, Fang, Fin, Tail, and Heart. At first, I suppose this was like, us calling on the power of Orobashi, since that was the protector deity. That would make sense that the shrines are referencing him, right? But then I realized that snakes don't have fins. So why is there a fin shrine? Now, by the time I got to the final shrine, the Heart, I was more than convinced that these shrines did not represent Orobashi in any way. I mean, if they did, why on earth are all of the related statues of koi fish? Orobashi is a snake. And then it hit me. The shrines have to be representing the dragon heir specifically, because the dragon heir is represented by a koi fish. There are going to be so many confused Westerners right now. See, there's this really prevalent myth in both Japan and China about a golden river wherein schools of golden koi would swim against the current in order to gain strength. But the koi always turned around and swam downstream once they reached the waterfall at the end of the river. However, some koi wanted to swim beyond the waterfall and would try to leap over it over and over and over, never quite managing to do so. Some local demons mocked them and used magic to make the waterfall even larger and the feat more impossible, so most of the koi then gave up. But one koi kept on trying to leap over that enormous waterfall for over 100 years. Then one day, it finally made the leap, and the gods rewarded the koi by transforming it into a mighty golden dragon. Golden dragon, dragon heir, koi statues. You see where I'm going with this now, right? Now, a lot of people call Kokomi a mermaid, but she's always looked like a betta or a goldfish to me. And now I think she's actually supposed to be a koi fish. She's the heir of the people of the Dark Sea who originally worshipped a water dragon. Even her constellation translates to Sleeping Dragoness, which means that she's currently just a koi fish and will one day ascend to become a true dragon. She is a dragon priestess, the heir of a dragon heir. And take another look at her constellation, then compare it to the island of Watatsumi. They are very similar. In fact, the stars on her constellation align fairly closely with each location of the shrines used in the ritual to reseal the entrance to Enkonomiya. No, it's not perfect, but it's enough to be suspicious. There's an eye, a fin, a tail, a heart, and a spike that I suppose could be a fang-like thing since it's near the mouth, and one final star set in the position where the pool of Enkonomiya is located on Watatsumi. And her constellation looks like a serpentine dragon. And this is what convinced me that the island of Watatsumi was constructed out of the remaining body of the dragon heir, then sealed with coral that Orobashi collected. That puts the dragon heir's body in Sangonomiya and the soul in Enkonomiya, which is why the soul keeps calling out to the body and leaching nutrients. It's trying to become one entity again. To further this claim, I can point to the pearl motifs littered around the island. While I think Western culture wouldn't really link pearls and dragons together traditionally, it's actually a really common thing to do with Asiatic dragons. Ever notice how so many of these serpentine dragon depictions are clutching these crystal balls? I mean, have you ever watched Dragon Ball Z? That's kind of what this is based off of. No? Well, okay. Anyway, these orbs are often known as pearls. There's even a Chinese myth about the dragon pearl. Now notice how the Sangonomiya shrine is located right in the center of a large oyster shell motif? This could be implying that the shrine and the people are the pearl of the dragon. And further still, the shrine priestess. After all, Kokomi's title is quite literally Pearl of Wisdom. And Asiatic dragons are typically water deities. The most notable one in Japan is the dragon god Ryujin, which may sound a little familiar because he's a brother to Raijin or Raiden and Fujin. Yeah, like, the Raiden shogun. They're the thunder and wind gods. And even more conspicuous is the fact that there is actually a Japanese dragon god named, you guessed it, Watatsumi. Which is what I think the Dragonair's name really is, Watatsumi. They named the island after their original god as a sign of respect. They still follow their original traditions, allowing their priestess to undergo a ceremonial transformation from feeble koi to powerful dragoness, forever holding on to that which they find most precious, the people of Watatsumi, the dragon's pearl. And one day, Kokomi will graduate from her role as a feeble Magikarp and become the Gyarados everyone wants her to be. In that way, she can respect the will of Orobashi as well. So what do you guys think? Is Watatsumi Island built on the remains of a dead dragon? Or is that just a convenient twist on an old myth? Let me know down in the comments below. I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say about this one. Anywho, this has been your resident Genshin conspiracy theorist Ashikai signing out. Until next time, guys, take care. Bye-bye.